Hey, welcome to another week, another episode of Just Hanging with the Nosebleed Seats, joined by Zach Wolchuk and Eric Chiafalo. They make up the Nosebleed Seats. I'm Jared Sandler. This is episode number 3. I think we've received average feedback so far, anywhere from average to just flat-out amazing feedback, which is pretty good range, I'd say.
Definitely.
Well, you told me it was all amazing, so now the average part has me a little bit concerned here, Jared.
Well, Eric's wife actually reached out to me and said that she thought Eric's performances have been really poor. I think she meant with this little episode. Maybe it was in another department. So that's where I said average. That's when the average comes into play.
No, I got to step my game up on and off the field. So, and it starts here, but it trickles into every part of my life. So I'm hoping to really get going, starting off on the right foot, and thank God we're talking baseball today. This is my wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk some baseball. We're going to talk some football. Actually, talk about the DFW sports teams. As always, we'd love for you to interact with us on Twitter. If there are things you'd like us to discuss, feel free to do some topic suggestions. We're happy to shoot the breeze on anything. Before we get started, though, want to congratulate Grandma Wolchuk celebrating a birthday. This is a big day for the Wolchuk family. Because it's the maternal grandmother, I guess her last name probably isn't Wolchuk, but we're going to call her Grandma Wolchuk anyway.
Hepker. Yeah, not Wolchuk. It is Hepker. But either way,
Hepker?
Yeah, Hepker, Hepker. But happy birthday to Grandma. I got to find out exactly how old she's turning today. To me, she's not a day over 21. Just a party, that grandma of mine. But, I can't wait to see her, have a little lunch, take something over. It's been a while since I've been able to see her with COVID. We've been trying to social distance because they're in that age group that is very susceptible. But for her birthday, she said, come on over here. I need to see my favorite grandson. So we're going to go over there and hang out.
Is she a bleeder?
She's a bleeder for the most part, no doubt. I mean, honestly, my grandmother can hold her own in a football conversation. She loves the Dallas Cowboys, and her all-time favorite Cowboy is Tony Dorsett. She's obsessed with Tony Dorsett. She thinks he has a great ass.
Okay. She probably would have done a lot better on that game show last night than you did.
She would have actually, I don't think so. She's not a big movie person. She's more of a book person. She likes to read the books.
Okay.
Loser.
All right, so let's get into we're going to talk about Mike McCarthy and year one expectations, but we've got the Major League Baseball draft kicking off tonight, so we figured we'd talk a little draft just for people out there. The big difference with this particular draft is instead of 40 rounds, it's 5 rounds. Zach makes sure to let you know he's wearing a Top Gun shirt. Way to go, Zach.
Top Gun, baby. I'm the Top Gun here.
Now, that doesn't mean that players after 5 rounds can't start their professional career. But what's really interesting is that teams are essentially in a recruiting battle with a financial cap of $20,000 per player to sign these undrafted free agents. And this is like the equivalent of maybe NBA teams having the chance to have a free-for-all and sign players after the top 10 picks in terms of the caliber of player. We're talking about guys who can really be big-time difference makers, guys who in, let's say, last year – the last pick of the 10th round had a slot value in signing bonus money of well over $100,000. The first pick of the 6th round had a slot value of around $500,000. So, I mean, that's the type of money that these players would otherwise be able to earn, but instead they can only earn $20,000 if they choose to sign. There are a lot of wrinkles. I have a video out on 1053thefan.com that explains that in greater detail. But I wanted to talk just in general the DFW sports teams and drafting. Do we feel like we've got a good drafting metroplex with the sports teams? And if you think about it, the answer is really no. I was thinking to myself, which team has been the best drafting team over the last, I don't know, of our lifetimes? We're all around the same age, and certainly over the last decade or so, it's got to be the Cowboys, right?
Yeah, I would think it's probably the Cowboys over the last decade, but I don't think a lot of people think of the Stars. The Stars have actually drafted sneakily pretty well.
Have they, though? Because I actually think they've been really poor other than drafting Miro Heiskanen. Like, wasn't that their rap prior to that draft, is that they've totally squandered their first-round pick and they haven't been able to develop young guys from within?
So here's, I think, yes, it was. When you look at this year's team, they've got a lot of contributors. Radek Faksa, Dennis Durianov, Rupe Hintz, Jason Dickinson. they've got a lot of guys that have come up the pipeline now that they did draft and that have developed here within the Texas Stars and the Dallas Stars organization that are playing massive roles for the Stars now. So I do think the perception was maybe the Stars aren't a great drafting team, and you're right. Maybe the first round hasn't been great for the Stars because even when you go back to Alexiak, right, who was a first-round pick of the Stars, didn't really pan out. He goes to Pittsburgh, wins a cup, but now he's back with the Stars and he's playing really well. So, I mean, maybe he was a bit of a late bloomer and he had to go somewhere else to kind of find his niche. Then he came back. But outside of the first round, the Stars have actually found some pretty tremendous value. And when you look at the players that are performing for them now, they actually are getting some solid production from some of their core draft picks.
Okay, so I'm gonna take the other side. I've got their draft for the last decade, and I want to read. It's not going to take long. Let's start with the year before Miro. So Miro was drafted in 2017. The 2016 draft, not a single player has played for the Stars at all. Riley Tuft was the first-round pick. Now, the 2015 draft was a good draft because they got Gurionov and Hintz. No one else, but they got those two. That's a good draft. 2014, Julius Honka was their first-round pick, and he sucks. And no one else has played in the NHL for the Stars or anyone else. 2013, Val Nichushkin. He grossly underperformed. They did get Jason Dickinson out of that draft, and he was a second first-round pick, but no one else. 2012, Radek Faksa, and then they got Devin Shore and Essa Lindell, but those guys weren't, those are like role players at best. Jamie Alexiak, first-round pick in 2011. I mean, he certainly hasn't performed like a first-round pick. And then Jack Campbell in 2010, a goalie who, they just failed to develop. So I don't know. I think if you were to compare that to other teams, they've probably been below average in terms of drafting.
Oh, we'd have to pull up the other teams, but I think that, they found solid starters there. It is the point when you're comparing it with, the Mavericks who have kind of punted on the draft a lot of the time. Certainly when you come out with Luka and Jalen Brunson recently, and when you go with the Mavericks history, they have drafted some guys like Devin Harris and Josh Howard and Marquise Daniels that have performed. But I think overall, when you look at the Stars and guys that have been NHL players and at least come up and played for them, they might end up being the second best drafting team in DFW.
Well, so I don't think that's a high bar.
It's not. But then does that mean that we don't really have great drafting teams here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, and I know Eric is chomping at the bit to talk about the Rangers. I think the Rangers are in a similar boat as the Stars. I think they've absolutely missed on first-round picks, but if you look at their team, and now the Major League Baseball's got a second component where they've got the international free agents, which that's got to be held in some similar regard. If you do, then they've done a really, I'd say, an above-average job overall. And after the top 5 rounds, I think the Rangers have actually been pretty good. The problem is you don't often get superstars after the top 5 rounds, and the Rangers have done a really poor job of hitting on first-round picks. So I would say the Rangers are second, but I don't think that's necessarily like an accomplishment. I just think that the Mavs and the Stars have been bad. The Mavs have been super bad other than acquiring Luka.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would say the Mavs have been super bad. I think they've sort of neglected it for a long time. Now, if you go back to the Giannis draft, that is certainly a major swing and miss there. And I know Cuban wishes he would have listened to Donnie that year. But this is – and the one thing about drafting in all leagues, in all sports – it's a total crapshoot. It's tough to look at one team and be like, man, this team every year just freaking nails it. Looking at the NFL, you have the Ravens are like one of those organizations that you feel like almost every year come away with pretty good drafts. But it's such a coin flip for all these leagues. And I think the Mavs would be better at it if they actually cared more about it. And you saw the way they handled the Luka stuff. That was huge. With the Rangers right now, yeah, like you said, you're finding good talent later on. You're finding good role players, but role players don't really mean anything if you don't have the couple of big stars on your team. It's nice to have those guys. You need to fill out the roster with those guys, but you got to be able to hit on those first, second, third round picks, and that's just something that they haven't done right now. There's no question that the Cowboys have been the best, but even they have had their moments where they're taking Taco Charlton and doing these things where you're like, oh gosh, and that's just the way the draft works. So ultimately, I think most of these teams in the DFW could stand to get better at it. But I think if you looked at most sports cities, most sports towns, I bet a lot of people would be having the same conversations. Like some years it's like, dang, we did a pretty nice job, but it's such a crapshoot with drafting.
Well, that's why I think the Stars have done actually a decent job. Like, I know we can go through and look at those drafts like you just did there, Jared, and you're right. I mean, the consistency is not necessarily there. But when you're looking at a team now that has 4 or 5 players that they've drafted and developed that are massive core pieces now to the Stars moving forward, I think that's a pretty good job that Jim Nill and company have done with the Dallas Stars since he's took over. The other thing is –
Hold on. You said 3 or 4 core pieces?
No, I said 4 or 5.
Who are the core pieces?
I think Rupe, Dennis Guryanov, definitely Miro Heiskanen is one, without question. Jason Dickinson, I think, has proven that he's a pretty good player.
Is he a core piece, though? He seems like a role player at best.
Well, I mean, what's the difference between a core piece and a role player for you?
A core piece is someone you can build around. A role player is someone that's not indispensable. I mean, Jason Dickinson this year has 21 points in 65 games. Is that
a massive contributor in the postseason last year, though, as well? I mean,
that's a small sample.
But he steps up and plays well in big games. And he's very young still. He hasn't played a ton of NHL games.
Okay, I don't know. To me, like, Jason Dickinson is not a win. Like, you don't look and say, first-round pick who doesn't even average a point every other game is not a win.
You want to say the Rangers are number 2. Who are you selling me on with the Rangers? Like, you brought up Ian Kinsler, okay? Ian Kinsler was over a decade ago.
Yeah, so first of all, are we including the international signs or no?
We can, app's fine. We can do that, sir. It's part of team building. I think it would probably be unfair if we didn't.
Okay, so I would say that Ronald Guzman's production is maybe equivalent to Jason Dickinson's, maybe a little less. But I think even though he's not on the team anymore, Nomar Mazara, just from the international signing standpoint, I think that's a quality player. Is that not? Like, he was an average. I mean, he's better than Jason Dickinson.
Is he?
Absolutely. I think so. Jason Dickinson is. What is Jason Dickinson at best? He's an average player.
Still has room to improve, and he's still a Dallas Star. Nomar Mazara, the team has moved on from.
It doesn't. Well, okay. If we're looking at that, then we can also look at all the players the Stars wasted picks on who are no longer in the organization, who never even played Major League Baseball. I mean, as far as like an international acquisition with the percentage of guys who make it, I think Nomar Mazara at worst is just as productive as Jason Dickinson. I mean, Nomar Mazara was a middle-of-the-order bat for the Texas Rangers.
I know. I get that. It's just he plateaued. I think overall he was a disappointment. He had high expectations, and the Rangers have parted ways. I mean, Nomar Mazara was – I guess if you're looking at – if he's the guy that you're going to sell me on, I think
no, he's not. I'm starting with the international guys, but –
That's fine.
All right, so I'm trying to – Baseball Reference is failing me here. First of all, Joey Gallo.
Gallo for sure.
Okay, so
who are the guys at the Rangers that we can look at and say, okay, these are guys that they've drafted, even if they're not up? Like, we're still optimistic on Josh Young for sure, no doubt about that.
Okay, so Josh Young, I'm going to go year to year here. I'll start with 2012. So that's Joey Gallo. So out of that, they got Joey Gallo, they got Keone Kela, who helped them win a division. They got Lewis Brinson, who was a big part in a trade later on for the Rangers. So I think there's got to be some credit there, although, you can say that Lewis Brinson wasn't as good as he should have been. 2013, you're looking at, Kiner, who, again, if Jason Dickinson is a win, then Kiner's a win. Like, as far as, like, solid contributor. I don't think that Jason Dickinson's any better than Kiner. And
I'd strongly disagree, but that's fine.
I just don't get what a guy who averages a point every 3 games, like how valuable is a first-round pick?
He's valuable minutes, and he's proven to be valuable in postseason games.
That's one postseason. He had one postseason. You can make this.
He had a chance to have one postseason. We'll see what he does in the NHL restart here. This postseason go around. He's only had the opportunity to play in one postseason.
All right.
Izzy's not in the future for the Rangers.
That's
Jared.
fine, but again, we're talking about a guy who's averaging 1 point every 3 games. I don't know that Jason Dickinson's much.
I'm not trying to act like he's a great player, but the Stars drafted him, and they're getting contributions from him. I don't think the Rangers right now have a ton of guys that they've drafted that we look at and say, man, that guy's really helped out this team a ton.
Okay, but how many – my guess my point again is, like, okay, do we count Kyle Hendricks, who won, who's like a huge part because the Rangers drafted him? I mean, you said guys who
but hasn't been good with the Rangers.
That's okay, but does he not get credit for helping to acquire someone a part of like a postseason run?
It does. I would say it does for sure. Like the way if you draft somebody and then you flip them for some good stuff, some good players, then you have to count that. Absolutely. For me, when I look at the Rangers, it's always like, okay, what did you do? But what could you have done? Like when you're drafting Chichi Gonzalez instead of Aaron Judge, and you had 2 first-round picks that year. Like, come on. What are you doing? You could have had Yelich and you took Skull. You could have had freaking Mike Trout and you took Perk. Like, it's those moments where I'm like, man, the Rangers could right now have a star-studded
Sure, but
line.
you can do that. If we went and looked at the NHL drafts, and I'm not going to act like I recall off the top of my head, players who were drafted after the Stars, but you could do the exact same thing there. But the Rangers – Josh Young and Sam Huff, Cole Winn, I think they deserve credit for Leote, who, could be the center fielder of the future if you're looking at guys. Hans Kraus, who everyone seems to be really high on. I think the road to becoming a major leaguer is longer than it is depending on who you draft on the NHL side. They're both unique in that they, it's not a direct path to the pros like it is in the NFL or the NBA, so it's tough to assess. And maybe the Stars are better. I think both of them have been bad. Like, I don't think the Stars have been – I think the Stars have been a really bad drafting team. As a matter of fact, I would say they've been a bottom quarter of the NHL drafting team.
And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'd have to go back and look at the drafts, let's say over the last 10 years of the rest of the NHL. It just does seem like the Stars have been able to find production on their current roster of guys that are playing for them right now versus what the Rangers are looking at. I think the Cowboys, clearly we've said, are number 1. And then when you look at the Mavericks, when they've actually committed and tried in the draft, I think they've done a pretty good job. But there were years and years where they're still trying to hold out on the last few years of Dirk, where they said, you know what, we'd be better served maybe trading away these assets to try and keep a competitive team around Dirk to where we're not trying. When it comes to the Rangers, I think I side with most of the fan base and say, and you're 100% right, it's probably way more difficult to evaluate because of the path and how long it takes to finally make it to the major leagues, which might skew this discussion a little bit. But, I mean, we're still bringing up names that haven't even come up and contributed to the Rangers yet, and we're crossing our fingers and hoping that they can be good big league players. Whereas I think for the most part, we haven't seen a lot of homegrown talent for the Rangers come up here and play well. Yes, Joey Gallo was one. You mentioned Nomar Mazar, but he's no longer with the team. And I think that is the frustration here. And it's much easier when you're the Houston Astros, and we got to give them credit because they hit on these picks. But when you tank and you have 3 or 4 years of high first-round picks, and now you've made it into, even though they cheated, a World Series-like roster, those players are still really good. Despite the banging of the trash cans, they hit on those picks. The Rangers had an opportunity, and as you've mentioned, they evaluated Alex Bregman as the best player in that draft, and kudos to them, but they took Dylan Tate. And what do they have to show for it? Nothing.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sitting here arguing and saying the Rangers have been good at drafting. I think they've been okay at getting role players in, the 10 to 25th round. But I also think the Stars have been one of the 5 or 6 worst drafting teams in the NHL over the last decade.
Jared, I guess that I do want to ask you a Rangers question in regards to guys like Josh Young, Sam Huff. Is there a feeling personal for you and then within the organization of the guy that they're most excited about in terms of their young prospects?
Yeah, that's one reason why this is such an unfortunate year, because I think there were a lot of guys, like, you really start to develop excitement and momentum when a guy reaches AA, because at that point they're truly one step away. Even though there's a level above, we see a lot of guys skip double or skip AAA. And a lot of the guys like, Josh Young, who hasn't played above A ball. Maximo Acosta, Anderson Tejeda, Leody Taveras got some double-A time last year, but like there are a lot of guys, Oslevis Basabe, guys who the organization is really high on, Hans Kraus, Ricky Vanasco, who this was going to be a big year because a lot of those guys would get to double-A, and you'd really be able to see. But I'd say that, it ranges. Chris Cease was one of those guys, but, coming off another injury, who knows? Leody Taveras, I still think garners some excitement. Josh Young, obviously. I mentioned Ricky Vanasco. He's a name not a lot of people have talked about, but who is a rising stud within the system. But I'd also sit here and tell you, despite all that, Eric, while those guys certainly could become stars, is there someone in the organization who the league views as like a can't-miss rising star who you can help build a team around? I don't know that guy is there right now. It might be, it might be one of those lower-level guys. Maybe Josh Young is that middle-of-the-order bat that is a big part of it. But I don't know that, we're not talking about a top 25 prospect in the league. And, that's in part because of, whether it's some bad luck like Cole Reagans with double Tommy John, who knows, what would have happened if he stayed healthy. And, a lot of people want to pin that on the Rangers. And it's just tough to do. That's like a lot of these things where it's not one reason. Maybe part of it is Cole Reagans' high school work regimen. Some of it might just be bad luck. It's tough to know. But, the reality is if you look at the Rangers' first and second round pick history over the last decade, it's been really poor.
So we got the draft tonight, and from a Rangers standpoint, with it only being, going from 40 rounds to 5 rounds, a lot of things are going to be different. How do you think that changes the Rangers' strategy, and maybe all teams, but specifically the Rangers and how they attack the draft? Is it one of those deals where they say, hey, we're not going to get as many cracks at it as we usually do, so let's not take a high-risk player, a guy with maybe a super high ceiling but a super low floor. Maybe we take the guy who's got a high floor, maybe not a high ceiling, but we're just looking for a decent player here because we don't want to miss because we don't have as many selections as usual.
Yeah, those are both good questions, and I think signability is another thing because – while you certainly don't want to risk a player getting selected in the first 5 rounds that you might not sign, I think that becomes a way more heightened focus point because if one of your 5 picks decides not to sign, that weakens your draft class by 20%. I think that – I think my best answer for that is because they've been they don't have like a true track record of, this is their MO, at least after what they did last year. It's kind of broken that pattern. I think we'll be able to tell after tomorrow when the 5 rounds are done what their thought process was. Last year, I think they went higher floor. When you get a college bat from a big-time school like Josh Young, not to say he doesn't have a high ceiling, but that probably is a less risky pick than any high school kid. And the Rangers have certainly not been afraid to take high school athletes or pitchers. And I say athletes because a lot of the guys they've taken who are position players out of high school are guys that have those athletic tools with star potential, but they're very raw. That's kind of been their pattern. My guess is those picks are not going to be what you see, especially in the first round here tonight. All right. So, go ahead. Were we best?
No, that's awesome. Do you have a position in mind? Do you think they're looking for someone to add to, like, they want to add another bat? Are they looking for a pitcher?
Yeah.
Like what?
I guess what I'd say is I present a quick case for both sides. On the arms side of things, if you look at their top 30 prospects, and this is not an objective thing, every publication is different, but if you were to, you're looking at around 10 to 12 pitchers in your top 30, and you'd like it to be a higher number than that. So that's the case for getting a pitcher. And then the case for getting the hitter is what I said earlier. I mean, do you have an up-the-middle bat who you think you can build a team around? And even Josh Young, he's a third baseman. And you look at championships, and championships are often won up the middle. You need to be strong up the middle, catcher, shortstop, center field. You don't have to be strong at all of those, but it does help to have strength there. And the Rangers right now are not strong really in any of those areas. And so it's I think if you can find a really strong up the middle bat, then I think that's a guy you've got to strongly consider. All right.
Fantastic.
this is we said we'd get into some Mike McCarthy stuff. I want to I don't think we anticipated the draft stuff becoming as big of a topic as it was, but we all agreed Cowboys best drafting team, right, in DFW, at least of late.
Yeah, I'd say definitely over the last 10 years for sure.
Okay. Mike McCarthy, first year expectations. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so The Athletic did a Cowboys survey, fan survey, and basically 75% of the fans said a successful season for the 2020 Cowboys year one under Mike McCarthy would be getting to the NFC Championship game. And then you start running the numbers on it and you start looking, okay, well, what's the track record of first-year coaches over the last decade or 2 decades? And so they put this together. Over the last 10 years in the NFL, there have been 68 new head coaches. Only 17 of those 68 coaches took their team to the playoffs in year one. The group combined to win a total of 11 playoff games, and one of those, 4 of those coaches reached the conference championship game. One was Gary Kubiak, who was the only one to actually reach the Super Bowl. But when you take a closer look at it, over the last 10 years, 2 of the 68 coaches that were new hire coaches in year one had previously won a Super Bowl, because that's like what Mike McCarthy, a lot of people are thinking, hey, McCarthy's won a Super Bowl, maybe this should be a quicker process for him. And then, of course, the fact that the Cowboys have a really good team usually, and that's the one thing that skews the numbers here for the Cowboys, is most of the time when you're looking at a first-year coaching situation, the team is really, really bad. They were probably picking in the top 5 or top 10 of the draft. The Cowboys are unique in that they weren't picking in the top 5 or top 10. They have a really good core, especially offensively. They have a young, budding, maybe superstar quarterback. They have, the expectations are still high. It's not your run-of-the-mill first-year head coach team. But over the last 10 years, of the 68 new head coaches, only 2 of them had previously won a Super Bowl. That's John Gruden and Mike Shanahan. Gruden went 4-12 in his first season with the Raiders, 2018. Mike Shanahan with the Redskins in 2010 went 6-10. So a total of 12 coaches have won Super Bowls. Now, this is in the history of the NFL. A total of 12 coaches have won Super Bowls and then later taken a job with a new team. So Mike McCarthy is basically one of 12 coaches to have done that. Only one, Mike Holmgren in 1999, was able to reach the playoffs in his first season with the new club. And the group combined to go 71, 112, and 3. Basically, first-year coaches, not first-year coaches, but coaches in their year one with their new team usually don't bode that well. And on average, their teams go 7-9 as a record. So it just brings up the question, should we temper the expectations a little bit when 75% of Cowboys fans are saying it'll only be a successful season if we reach the NFC Championship game?
No. The answer is no. And, those are great stats. They're great numbers. But to your point, the Cowboys are a good team that Mike McCarthy's taking over. And the majority, like you said, of those coaches probably are taking over crappy teams. So do I care about those stats, to be honest with you? No, I really don't. I think those were pointless, wasted stats. Because I think the better study would be, let's go look at teams that the coaches took over that were 8-8 or better, right? And let's see how they did that next year, because they're taking over a team that's at least average if they were 8-8, right? I don't care if you're taking over a team that was 2-14 or 5-11. You're rebuilding. You're not expected year one to win. If you do, holy cow, that's gravy. That's a great job that you just did, like what Sean McVay did with the Rams, right? We were like, wow, our mind is blown here. With Mike McCarthy, you're taking over a well-oiled machine that, as you already mentioned, Eric, they check off a lot of the boxes on what you want with teams there. So I do think where it's unfair, you brought up the 75% that are saying NFC Championship game or bust. I think that's a good point. I don't know that we should lump that in with Mike McCarthy, because I think some of that is our frustration as a fan base and the baggage of Jason Garrett not being able to live up to expectations and probably holding this team back during the course of his decade as a head coach that we're now lumping onto Mike McCarthy. I think it's unfair to put our frustrations and the Jason Garrett era and carry that baggage onto Mike McCarthy's shoulders in a sense. So, I mean, I do think fair and reasonable expectations are to win a division year one, and let's see what he can do in the playoffs that Jason Garrett wasn't able to do. But to say, oh, man, if they don't make it to the NFC Championship game in year one, it's a failure of a season, that is probably unfair.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with Zach on all those fronts. I think, Zach, I think it was with you, maybe it was with Eric, but we, in one of our Around the NFL or just general NFL segments, we looked at, I think, some sort of formula that produced odds for best teams in the NFL. And the Cowboys came out at 5th. And whether we agree that they are that good or not, it just goes to show the quality of their roster. And, I'd wonder, so McCarthy's the 12th, right? Of the other 11 teams, is this maybe the best inherited roster for one of those coaches? If not, top 3. So, I think it's an interesting story. I think those stats tell an interesting story, but I think this is definitely not a case that's lumped into that. And, I think the expectations question is really interesting because obviously fans have different perspectives. I agree with Zach. I don't think NFC Championship or bust is a fair expectation. But when I said that to someone, they said, well, but how many more good years of Zeke do you think you have? And, how much longer do you have until maybe Dak's contract and how much you're paying him is going to impact the rest of the team? And, those are fair questions. I would just tend to go to I call this the RJ Choppy-thon. I know that, Eric, when you were filling in, this came up. I think you guys were talking about DeAndre Hopkins. Other than the quarterback, is there a single player on an NFL team worth more than one win? I don't think there is. And I don't know that, even a single player, DeAndre Hopkins, the best receiver in the NFL, arguably, I don't know that he's worth a full win if you look at how Vegas adjusts their totals when he was with the Texans this offseason versus when he left. And not that that's, the end-all be-all. I guess my point is, in agreement with Zach, I just think that's a tough bar to set for a team that didn't even make the playoffs. No matter how much hype there is, the Cowboys didn't make the playoffs last year. And to demand that sort of a leap with A, a new coaching staff, and B, dealing with the pandemic and how that might impact the transition, to me is really unfair.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I was going to say. A general year, if everything's normal off season, I think Cowboys, you better go win 10 games right now. Maybe I take it down one notch to you just need to win more than you lose. So being at least 9-7 because the pandemic, all these different things, new faces on the roster, whole new coaching staff, like that, no one can really quantify how much that's going to be, how much tougher that makes it for McCarthy and this team, especially coming out of the gate. So ultimately, I do think the Cowboys should be at least a 9-win team. And now with 7 instead of 6 teams in each conference that get to make the playoffs, I don't think there's a really good excuse for the Cowboys missing the playoffs unless obviously Dak goes down or, something, injuries are just ridiculous. But they should be able to be a playoff team.
All right, hey, our Zoom thing, we don't have that cool subscription, so it's about to end. We love everyone. We'll be back with you next week.